Bellemere was Nami's adoptive mother, who first entered the One Piece lore back in the East Blue arc. Her existence as Nami's mother has had profound implications on Nami's character growth arc. And like the first father that was visited in One Piece, it is equally necessary to spend time unpacking the value and meaning behind the first mother that the One Piece saga presents. Bellemere. We don't actually spend much time with Bellemere in the saga, as she tragically lost her life defending the lives of Nami and her sister Nojiko from Arlong, long before the events of One Piece ever began. Yet, so much of what we know about Bellemere is wrapped up in her sacrifice. However, one thing that might be even greater than her sacrifice as a mother to Nami and Nojiko was who she was and what she taught them as a mother. To understand what Bellemere taught and how she nurtured as a mother, you have to first understand who she was as a person. Bellemere was a quintessential delinquent. She grew up in Kokoyashi Village, the place where she raised her daughters, and during that time she created the same type of chaos her daughters did. She was a rebel who undoubtedly fought and mouthed her way to the fear and respect of her neighbors. With no other talents or interests other than growing tangerines and fighting, Bellemere joined the Navy. Bellemere was troubled by the way that pirates terrorized the peace-loving nations of the world, and so she joined and fought and made a career for herself. In fact, the jacket she wore on the night she returned from the Oikot Kingdom with Nojiko and Nami was the jacket of a Marine captain, which would indicate that she may have gained considerable rank in the Navy, as she at least served directly under a captain. Bellemere was a fighter, and a rebel, and a troublemaker. All she knew was her sense of justice and fighting her way into seeing it. Yet for all of her lack of true purpose, when she found Nojiko and Nami abandoned and lost in a decimated city, a new desire entered her heart. One, to become a mother. And as a mother, she instilled in her daughters these lessons. Bellemere taught her daughters unconditional love. She taught them that even for those who are born to different parents, the love of a mother who isn't biologically tied to you is just as strong. Bellemere taught her daughters sacrifice. In her village, she wasn't very wealthy. In fact, she was poor by most standards. Bellemere, for her daughters, skipped meals and scrimped and saved the best she could in order to provide for them. She even left her career in the Marines to be a mother, the one thing that she relied on for income. Now, she relied only on her tangerine orchard that wasn't very lucrative. Bellemere didn't have the ability to buy her daughters everything she wanted to buy for them, but she would always entertain their wishes and encourage them to make their requests to her even if they knew she couldn't afford it, because Bellemere was the type of mother that if there was a way to sacrifice to get her daughters what they wanted, she would make that sacrifice. Bellemere taught her daughters strength. For as much as she didn't enjoy having to chase after them, for as much as she did enjoy seeing them viewed as the delinquent she was when she was growing up, Bellemere wanted her daughters to always be strong, not to apologize for being tough or having opinions or having wants, and not to allow the fact that they're girls to impede upon that strength. Bellemere taught her daughters to nurture their own dreams and minds. Nami, from a very young age, showed interest in maps. She grew in her studies from when she was very young and was a consumer of books. Bellemere loved this trait of Nami's and nurtured it, praised it, and spurred her on to grow, even to draw a map of the entire sea, even to become a navigator. Bellemere raised smart girls. She taught her daughters about joy. It is very easy to find yourself in life internalizing the circumstances that you find yourself in from season to season. When things are good, it's easy to believe that you should be happy. And when things are bad, when life doesn't work out in your favor, as it has the chance of doing now and again, it's easy to believe that you should be sad and depressed. But Bellemere knew that to be strong, to be a fighter, to love yourself means that even in the worst of times, the strongest thing you can do is smile, to enjoy yourself, and to have joy, that when you make it through that season, you can experience the greater joy to come. These are the lessons that Bellamere taught Nojiko and Nami, lessons that we learned only in her last chapter, but to be sure, Bellamere's lessons, her instruction and guidance that she gave to her daughters was 10 years in the making. She was the one to comfort them, to chastise them, to encourage them, and to give them stability. And although we don't see it in One Piece, Bellamere was their mother from the time they were in diapers. She taught them to speak. She taught them to run. And she cared for them when they were sick. Bellamere, although her time as a mother was short, was that in every sense of the word. Mother is both a noun and a verb. It is both who you are and what you do. A mother is someone who gives birth to a child, and in most cases, this is how you acquire the title. Yet other mothers acquire the title by what they do. You nurture, you guide, you love, and you take in children who need someone to give them a home. Bellamere mothered in ways that many natural mothers can't or won't. She loved Nami and Nojiko fiercely, and even sacrificed herself for them, knowing that there was no other way that they would be safe. She didn't have all of the answers, and she probably wasn't prepared to be a mother when her time at motherhood presented itself. She was rough around the edges. Yet she was humble enough to walk through and grow into motherhood just as her daughters grew from babies to girls, preparing to be young women. She was willing to admit when she was wrong. She did her best to make amends, and she made it her aim to make sure that her daughters knew that they were loved. Bellamere wasn't the typical mother, but of all the mothers One Piece could have focused on to tell their story first, there is none more fitting than Bellamere.
Never give up. You must find the strength inside you to always move on. You must live through every moment. And if you can smile in the face of it all, that is the greatest strength.
What many have said about One Piece, other than about how long it is that it is an amazing series. One that is emotional, artistic, beautiful, and exciting. They also may say that if you're not convinced of the quality of One Piece by the end of the Arlong Park arc, it probably just isn't for you. The reason being is that the Arlong Park arc is one of the most emotionally challenging and moving stories in all of One Piece, told in a very short dozen or so episodes. It tells the story of a pirate that captures a town and extorts them, and in particular, a small girl named Nami, for years and years. But beyond the excitement of battling pirates, discovering fishmen, and freeing a town, the emotional core of this arc is Nami's story, and the success of this arc all hinges on her and a decision she made to ask for help.
What do you want? You don't know anything about
I told you to leave.
You don't know
this
what's been
place.
happening on
Yep,
this island
sure
for the
did.
past 8 years.
So leave. Nope, I don't. I told you to leave.
Luffy, help me.
Nami's cry to Luffy was one made by someone who had exhausted their strength and luck. Her ideas, her plans, her calculations, and her cunning were all defeated by what Arlong did to this proud young woman. In a state of utter impotence, she did the last thing she promised she'd never do: ask for help. So the question is, why did a girl become a woman so hell-bent on seeing her dream realized alone, on her own terms, and without help? Nami was only a baby when Bellamere, her adoptive mother, found her and her sister Nojiko. She cared for them and raised them for 10 years. Nami, too young to have even remembered her life before Bellamere, came to love and adore her as her mother. Yet when Arlong captured her village, his first act as tyrant and overlord was to collect a brutal tax that ultimately caused Bellamere the loss of her life. What this did to Nami was take away the one form of security that she had in her entire world. Nami no longer was able to have an adult in her life that loved and cared for her, that protected her, that gave her a sure foundation. This, the world that she had enjoyed before Arlong came to her town, was now no more. In that same moment that her world was taken from her, her security was ripped away, Arlong also took her and forced her to become his cartographer, a skill that she grew as a child, encouraged by her mother. Nami's skill, her ambition, and her desires now all belonged to Arlong, and it was this servitude as Arlong's cartographer that ultimately kept her sister, Nojiko, safe. In the years she spent in servitude as Arlong's cartographer, she knew that had she decided to run away, quitting her job within the Arlong Pirates, she would not be able to rely on Arlong's mostly implicit promise not to harm her loved ones. Instantly, Nami was forced into somewhat of a parental role for her town. She had to silently protect not only her sister, but every other peaceful resident of her home, knowing that if she were ever to have stepped out of line, they might have met the same fate as her mother. And so Nami never allowed herself to rely on her town again, never to seek them out for guidance, never to ask them for emotional support, and never to reveal to them the true nature of her alliance with Arlong, in what seemed to be her abandonment of her home. Disappearing for long periods of time and severing many of the ties that she had to the people around her, some of the people of Kokoyashi Village assumed that Nami had decided to put herself before them, to live in a manner that protected her alone. And although it's reasonable not to judge Nami for her decision, not to want to be restricted and confined to a serfdom in which a tyrannical pirate crew enforced their brutal will upon a town, the reality is that Nami stepped into that role as the black sheep of her village because she made a deal with Arlong that if she were to acquire a bounty large enough, she would buy back her town, their freedom, from Arlong. So after making a deal with the devil and attempting to play his dirty game, Nami decided to become a thief, hoarding a fortune of money in hopes that one day she'd be able to pay Arlong off. In doing so, Nami became the most devious type of person, one who always has an angle and an agenda, one who doesn't trust a soul, and would fool even the kindest soul to get her money, to get her wish. She only trusted in money, her number one hope. Yet when Nami had secured her bounty, Arlong reneged, sending a troop of soldiers that he was in bed with to the site of Nami's hoard. They raided and took back all of the money that she had acquired. And in this act, her final plan, her most cunning trick, was foiled. There was nothing else in her arsenal. She had no more plans, and the very people that she was protecting were at the very edge of their own passivity and ability to endure the treatment of Arlong and his pirate crew. And so Nami watched them in their plan to rebel, and all she could see in that moment, being unable to sway them or use her guile to change their minds, was a group of people marching to their graves. So in the scene in which Luffy gave her a choice, to need him, to accept what he'd provide her, if she'd only ask, Nami had to cast off more burdens than she may have known she was carrying. She had to cast off her fear of trusting in someone other than herself after her foundation was taken from her. She had to remove her identity as a person owned by the Arlong pirates, someone who had no real will outside of them. She had to defy the cunning and sly character that she had become to secure her dream for her village. She had to abandon her belief that she would be the only one capable of saving her town, that she was the buffer between Arlong and his cruelty towards Kokoyashi village, and that her silence was keeping everyone around her safe. All self-concepts that were 8 years in the making. This is what it took for Nami to break down and ask for help. Because despite all that she had feared, learned, and become since Arlong took over her village, she knew in the deepest part of her heart that she couldn't do it alone. And in that moment, there was too much at stake. And so she asked for help, and when she did, everything changed. So like Nami, in order for us to make the change that we want to see in our lives, to defy the flow of life that sometimes can carry us away from our deepest desires and most happy selves, we have to remove every false belief we had about ourselves in order to find our way to the right path. Certainly not an easy thing to do, but well worth it.
お前は俺の仲間だ。
One Piece isn't just an anime. It doesn't just tell the most fanciful stories a creative mind could ever come up with. One Piece is a mirror. And as much as it reflects our imaginations and deepest wishes about the world, it also reflects the world and the arc of human history in all of its glory and tragedy. So let's take a look at the first major arc of One Piece and take a look at the secrets it can tell us about our own past. In the Arlong Park arc of One Piece, we find that it centers two primary characters: Arlong, our villain, a fishman turned pirate captain, and Nami, a little girl from Kokoyashi village, and our hero. Arlong descended upon Kokoyashi village one day with the intent of making himself a camp. Arlong entered the village, and his first plan of action after setting up his camp and docking at the port was to establish himself as a ruler and tyrant over the lives of the Kokoyashi villagers. His first task was to establish a tax. Each villager of Kokoyashi village was forced to pay 100,000 berries for each adult and 50,000 berries for each child in order to live safely without fear of their lives being taken. So, he went to each villager and collected the tax. However, our hero Nami was an orphan and very poor. Her adoptive mother, Bellamere, lived in a tangerine orchard with her and her sister Nojiko on the outskirts of the village. And when Arlong came to their house to collect the tax, Bellamere, Nami's mother, knew that she would not be able to pay. As an ex-Marine, she knew that there was no escaping Arlong, and there was no tricking him, and no escape from their town when he had taken siege. So instead of having her daughters run away to find safety away from Kokoyashi village and the tax for their lives, she paid them herself and left her own tax to go unpaid, to the end of her life at the hands of Arlong. Arlong then took in our hero Nami as he found that she was a brilliantly talented cartographer that could map out the entire sea for him. So Arlong extorted her and forced her to become an essential part of the Arlong pirates in exchange for the safety of her village, only giving her a glimmer of hope in a deal that if she were able to collect 100 million berries, he would set her village free. Arlong was able to do this for nearly a decade, extorting the people of Kokoyashi village with a monthly tax, taking their lives if they could not pay him, and generally keeping them in fear because he was strong enough to overtake their local authorities and governing bodies. He also took advantage of the fact that as a small island in the East Blue, there was very little access to the strength of the military, the navy that opposed pirates throughout the world. Most of them were stationed in the Grand Line, where the majority of the most notorious and dangerous pirates were located. In fact, Arlong was himself a pirate that came from the Grand Line. The local military wasn't strong enough to oppose Arlong, as he at the time was the strongest pirate crew in the East Blue. And so, to avoid even the possibility that authorities would signal to the world government to send more troops or stronger leaders, Arlong got into bed with members of the local world government, the Navy, to keep his activities under wraps to ensure that he could continue to extort the people of Kokoyashi Village. This he did for 8 years, with the aid of his crew and the complicity of the local governing bodies. He caused harm, death, and misery in the lives of the people of Kokoyashi Village until Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates came to the aid of Nami and the villagers of Kokoyashi, defeating Arlong, exposing the complicit military, and freeing Kokoyashi from Arlong's hold. The story of Arlong and his occupation of Kokoyashi Village has strong similarities to the story of the corsair Turgis Reis, otherwise known as Dragut. Dragut was an Ottoman corsair or pirate who for a time in his young life was forced to serve as a type of bond slave in a galley. After escaping, he became a corsair under the Ottoman Empire. He joined the likes of the Barbarossa pirates and then rose to his own fame, notably occupying Tripoli. During his time in Tripoli, he was ruthless. He imposed cruel taxes on the inhabitants. He also threatened their lives, many of them being forced into slavery, some killed. He did all of this in the name of his own ideological beliefs, and in response to what was at the time a history of colonialism and cruelty on the behalf of Christians and Westerners on Muslims, and particularly those of North Africa. During his time in Tripoli, he rose to prominence and was even given the title of governor from the Ottoman Empire. Interested in their own supremacy and expansion, the Ottoman Empire overlooked his cruelty for their own benefit. In this short history of Dragut, we learn how similar he is to Arlong and his pirate crew. Both Dragut and Arlong were subject to oppression. Fishmen in the One Piece universe are viewed as second-class citizens and often treated with racism in the land-dwelling world. And similarly, Dragut experienced this in his bond slavery and generally as much of North Africa was being colonized by European Christians. Both of these figures joined very famous pirate crews and then set out to make a name for themselves on their own. Dragut was a part of the Barbarossa Pirates, and Arlong was a member of the Sun Pirates. During his occupation, Dragut enforced cruel taxes upon the citizens of Tripoli, just as Arlong imposed cruel taxes upon the people of Kokoyashi Village. Any dissent on either of their parts was met with violence. They were both also in bed with local governments. The Ottoman Empire endorsed and allowed his reign in Tripoli, and the world government, or at least the local bodies of the military, looked the other way when Arlong took over Kokoyashi Village, out of one, being unable to stop him without backup, and two, because of the benefit they would receive in the form of money from Arlong by letting him have his way. Arlong and Dragut are very similar figures. The ways in which someone hurt by society would give themselves reason to enforce their cruelty upon others is something that isn't divorced from human nature. Still, the stories aren't perfectly the same. Dragut was able to embed himself enough into Tripoli that he was propped up as a legitimate governor, even though he began as a pirate. Still, it is important that, like the hero Nami learned from her mother, we're able to smile even through very tough times, so we don't allow that cruelty to become a part of who we are, and that we don't perpetuate it upon the world around us. A lesson that had Dragut and Arlong learned may have steered them away from piracy. Still, for Tripoli and Kokoyashi Village alike, the drums of liberation did eventually roll. One Piece is a story, indeed, about Luffy's quest to become the king of the pirates. However, as much as it is about Luffy's dream to become king of the pirates, we don't actually spend a whole lot of time discussing and explaining the ways in which Luffy shows the traits of a pirate king, or someone who should be over everyone else, aside from his ability to power up and get greater and greater fighting abilities to defeat the villains of each arc. So let's take a little bit of time to look back at his first major arc, Arlong Park, to see how he shows the traits of a pirate king. First, he takes responsibility for Nami. Nami betrayed Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates when she returned to Kokoyashi Village in Arlong in order to secure the money she needed to free her town, something that she ultimately failed at doing. But having become a friend to and ally of the Straw Hat Pirates, Luffy claimed her as a friend, and before he let her go, he had to face her, acknowledge why she left, and give her the choice of returning. He took responsibility for Nami. When it was time for him to save her, the price of Nami returning to his crew was that he had to free Kokoyashi Village, something that Luffy ultimately did. He wasn't afraid of the price and he didn't run from it. He acknowledged that to get the person he cared about back, he would have to take on an infamous pirate crew and free a village from their control, something he deemed as a worthy enough price. Secondly, Luffy never cared about Nami's past. As Luffy landed on the island where Kokoyashi Village was, he wasn't privy to all of the information that the other Straw Hat Pirates learned about Nami and her past that gave them reason to fight on her behalf. In fact, Luffy said that he didn't care about Nami's past.
I don't care about her past.
All he cared about was the fact that she was a part of his crew, and he laid claim to her that they were linked. And as long as Nami chose not to sever that link, he would seek after her to bring her back into the fold because of who she is as a part of their crew, and not who she was or what she's been through. This is certainly the trait of a king who cares more about his subjects and their present identity rather than their past deeds and circumstances. Thirdly, Luffy required Nami to ask for help. For as much as Luffy wanted Nami to stay in his crew and would go to any length to bring her back, it was ultimately her choice to stay or go. Instead of pleading with Nami and asking for her to come back, Luffy showed up to Nami. He stated his purpose and he waited for her to make her decision. He waited for Nami to ask for help, showing her that he didn't care about what happened. He didn't care about what she did. He cares about who she is now and what her decision is going to be moving forward. And when she humbled herself to ask Luffy for help so that she could return to the place that she's meant to be, Luffy did the work. This is the heart of a king who cannot lower himself to plead or convince his subjects of what he needs, his crew of what he needs. He will state his purpose, he will make his claim, and he will give his crewmates the opportunity to return to the fold whenever they're ready. These are the traits that are preparing Luffy to become the king of the pirates. He is a strong leader who's willing to put up any price in order to ensure the safety of his crew, of his people. He doesn't care about your past, only your present. But he also understands that there is a line that cannot be crossed as a king, as a leader, in order to get what he wants. He gives his crew the free will to stay and remain loyal to him. Luffy has made great strides in his journey to become king of the pirates, but based upon his performance in the East Blue Arc, it is clear that he was always the king he's going to be.
俺はモンキー D ルフィ海賊王になる男だ。